Welcome back. How's everyone doing? I hope you had a fine weekend or, Friday and Saturday off anyway. It's Sunday night, so we're getting back into that work week. We're getting back to school tomorrow. So let's start winding down. Where we last left off, we were on page 46 in Terry Pratchett's Equal Rites, and Ask and Granny have tried borrowing for the first time. Borrowing is the technique that witches use in order to borrow the mind of another animal and ride through their senses, basically. Granny returned to her body, but Ask stole the body of an eagle and flew off. And that's where we are. So let's check in with that. Granny has just returned to the cottage and is about to lay Ask's sleeping body down. When she returned to the cottage, Granny put Ask's body to the bed and drew up the fire. She brought the goats in and milked them, and she finished the chores of the evening. She made sure that all the windows were open, and when it began to grow dark, lit a lantern and put it on the windowsill. Granny Weatherwax didn't sleep for more than a few hours a night as a rule, and woke again at midnight. The room had not changed, although the lantern had its own little solar system of very stupid moths. When she woke again at dawn, the candle had long burned down, and Ask was still sleeping the shallow, unwakeable sleep of the borrower. When she took the goats out to the paddock, she looked intently at the sky. Noon came, and gradually the light drained out of another day. She paced the floor of the kitchen aimlessly. Occasionally, she would throw herself into frantic bouts of housework. Ancient crusts were unceremoniously dug out of the cracks in the flagstones. The fire back was scraped free of winter's soot and blacklighted to within an inch of its life. A nest of mice in the back of the dresser were kindly but firmly ejected into the goat shed. Sunset came. The light of the Discworld was old and slow and heavy. From the cottage door, Granny watched as it drained off the mountains, flowing in golden rivers through the forest. Here and there it pooled in hollows until it faded and vanished. She drummed her fingers sharply on the doorpost, humming a small and bitter little tune. Dawn came again, and the cottage was empty still except for S's body, silent and unmoving on the bed. But as the golden light flowed slowly across the Discworld like the Sorry about all that. But as the golden light flowed slowly across the Discworld, like the first freshening of the tide over mudflats, the eagle circled higher and higher into the dome of heaven, beating the air down with slow and powerful wing beats. The whole of the world was spread out beneath Ask, all the continents, all the islands, all the rivers, and especially the great ring of the rim ocean. And there was nothing else up here, not even sound. Ask gloried in the feel of it, willing her flagging muscles into greater effort. But something was wrong. Her thoughts seemed to be chasing around beyond her control and disappearing. Pain and exhilaration and weariness poured into her mind. It was as if other things were spilling out at the same time. Memories were dwindling away on the wind. As fast as she could latch onto a thought, it evaporated, leaving nothing behind. She was losing chunks of herself, and she couldn't remember what she was losing. She panicked, burrowing back to the things she was sure of. I am Ask, and I have stolen the body of an eagle, and the feel of the wind and the feathers, the hunger, the search of the night sky below. She tried again. I am Ask, and seeking the wind path, the pain of the muscle, the cut of the air, the cold of it. I am Ask, over, air damp, wet, white, above everything, the sky is thin. I am. Granny was in the garden, among the beehives, the early morning wind whipping at her skirts. She went from hive to hive, tapping on their roofs. And then, in the thickets of borage and bee balm that she had planted around them, she stood with her arms outstretched in front of her, and sang something in tones so high that no normal person could have heard them. But a roar went up from the hives, and then the air was suddenly thick with heavy, big-eyed, deep-voiced shapes of drone bees. They circled over her head, adding her own bass, humming to their chant. Then they were gone, soaring into the growing light over the clearing and streaming away over the trees. It is well known, at least, it is well known to all witches, that all colonies of bees are, as it were, just one part of the great creature called the swarm, in the same way that individual bees are component cells of the hive mind. Granny didn't mingle her thoughts with the bees very often, partly because insect minds were strange, alien things that tasted of tin, but mostly because she suspected that the swarm was a good deal more intelligent than she was. She knew that the drones would soon reach the wild bee colonies of the forest, and within hours every corner of the mountain meadows would be under very close watch indeed. All she could do was wait. At noon the drones returned, and Granny read the sharp, acid thoughts of the hive mind that there was no sign of Esk. She went back to the cool of the cottage and sat down in the rocking chair, staring at the doorway. She knew the next step was. She hated the very idea of it. But she fetched a short ladder, climbed up creakily onto the roof, and pulled the staff from its hiding place in the thatch. It was icy cold. It steamed. Above the snow line, then, said Granny. She climbed down and rammed the staff into a flower bed. She glared at it. She had a nasty feeling that it was glaring back. Don't think you've won because you haven't, she snapped. It's just that I haven't got time to mess around. You must know where she is. I command you take me to her. The staff regarded her woodenly. By... Granny paused. Her invocations were a little rusty. By stock and stone I order it. Activity, movement, liveliness. All these words would be completely inaccurate descriptions of the staff's response. Granny scratched her chin. She remembered the little lesson all children get. What's the magic word? Please, she suggested. The staff trembled, rose a little way out of the ground, and turned in the air so that it hung invitingly at waist height. Granny had heard that broomsticks were once again very much the fashion among younger witches, but she didn't hold with it. There was no way a body could look respectable while hurtling through the air aboard a household implement. Besides, it looked decidedly drafty. Pause. Something you need to know about the word draft. So, in your mind, draft is going to be D-R-A-F-T. Because that makes sense. There's another version of the word draft, which is D-R-A-U-G-H-T, which should be drought or draught, but it's not. It's draft. So if you ever hear or see that word, that's what it is. The other kind of draft is for like a... I should say I don't really know how to define the difference. This kind of draft is for wind and for pours, usually of alcohol, which, depending on your age, I'm sure you'll get around to learning. Anyway, two different kinds of draft. Sometimes words sound like things that they shouldn't sound like. That's life. Anywho. But this was no time for respectability. Pausing only to snatch her hat from its hook behind the door, she clambered onto the staff and perched as best she could, side saddle, of course, and with her skirts firmly gripped between her knees. Right, she said. Now, across the forest, animals broke and scattered as a shadow passed overhead, crawling and cursing. Granny clung on with whitened knuckles, her thin legs kicking wildly, as high above the treetops, she learned important lessons about the centers of gravity and air turbulence. The staff shot onward, heedless of her yells. By the time it had come out over the upland meadows, she had come to terms with what... I'm so sorry. By the time it had come out over the upland meadows, she had come to terms with it somewhat, which meant that she could just about hang on with knees and hands, provided she didn't mind being upside down. Her hat, at least, was useful, being aerodynamically shaped. The staff plunged between black cliffs and along high, bare valleys, where, it was said, rivers of ice had once flowed in the days of the ice giants. The air became thin and sharp in the throat. They came to an abrupt halt over a snowdrift. Granny fell off and lay panting in the snow as she tried to remember why she was going through all this. There was a bundle of feathers under an overhang a few feet away. As Granny approached it, a head rose jerkily, and the eagle glared at her with fierce, frightened eyes. It tried to fly and toppled over. When she reached out to touch it, it took a neat triangle of flesh right out of her hand. I see, said Granny quietly to no one in particular. She looked around and found a boulder of about the right size. She disappeared behind it for a few seconds, for the sake of respectability, and reappeared with a petticoat in her hand. The bird thrashed around, ruining several weeks of meticulous petite point embroidery, which is like stitching and stuff. But she managed to bundle it up and hold it so she could avoid its sporadic lunges. Granny turned to the staff, which was now upright in the snowdrift. I shall walk back, she told it coldly. It turned out they were in a spur valley overlooking a drop several hundred feet onto sharp black rocks. Very well then, she conceded, but you're going to fly slowly, do you understand? And no going high. In fact, because she was slightly more experienced and perhaps because the staff was taking more care too, the ride back was almost sedate. Easy. Granny was almost persuaded that, given time, she could come to merely dislike flying instead of loathing it absolutely. What it needed was some way of stopping herself from having to look at the ground. The eagle sprawled on the rag rug in front of the empty hearth. It had drunk some water, over which Granny had mumbled a few of the charms that she normally said to impress patients. But she never knew. There might be some power in them after all. And it had also gulped down a few strips of raw meat. What it had not done was display the least sign of intelligence. She wondered whether she had the right bird. She risked another pecking and stared hard into its evil orange eyes, and tried to convince herself that way down their depths, almost beyond sight, was a strange little flicker. She probed around inside its head. The eagle mind was still there, right enough, vivid and sharp, but there was something else. Mind, of course, has no color, but nevertheless, the strands of the eagle's mind seemed to be purple, and around them, entangled among them, were faint strands of silver. Esk had learned too late that mind shapes body, that borrowing is one thing, but the dream of truly taking on another form had its own built-in penalty. Granny sat and rocked. She was at a loss, she knew that. Unraveling the tangled binds was beyond her power, beyond any power in the Ramtops, beyond even... There was no sound, but maybe a change in the texture of the air. She looked up at the staff, which had suffered to come back into the cottage. No, she said firmly. Then she thought, whose benefit did I say that for? Mine. There's power there, but it's just not my kind of power. There isn't any other kind around, though, and even now it may be too late. I might never have been early enough. She reached out again into the bird's head to calm its fears and dispel its panic. It allowed her to pick it up and sat awkwardly on her wrist, its talons gripping tight enough to draw blood. Granny took the staff and made her way upstairs to where Esk lay on the narrow bed in the low bedroom with its ancient contoured ceiling. She made the bird perch on the bed rail and turned her attention to the staff. Once more, the carvings shifted under her glare, never quite revealing their true form. Granny was no stranger to the uses of power, but she knew she relied on gentle pressure subtly to steer the tide of things. She didn't put it like that, of course. She would have said, there's always a lever if you know where to look. The power in the staff, though, was harsh, fierce, the raw stuff of magic distilled out of the forces that powered the universe itself. There would be a price, and Granny knew enough about wizardry to be certain that it would be a high one. But if you were worried about price, then why were you in the store? She cleared her throat and wondered what the hell she was supposed to do next. Perhaps the power hit her like a brick. She could feel it take her and lift her so that she was amazed to look down and see her feet still firmly on the floorboards. She tried to take a step forward and magical discharges crackled in the air around her. She reached out to steady herself against the wall, and the ancient wood beam under her hand stirred and started to sprout leaves. A cyclone of magic swirled around the room, picking up dust and briefly giving it some very disturbing shapes. The jug and the basin on the washstand, with a particularly fetching rosebud pattern, broke into fragments. Under the bed, the third member of the traditional China trio turned into something horrible and slunk away. Granny opened her mouth to swear and thought better of it, when her words blossomed out into rainbow-edged clouds. She looked down at Esk and at the eagle, which seemed oblivious to all this, and tried to concentrate. She let herself slide inside its head, and again she could see the strands of the mind, the silver threads bound so closely around the purple that they took on the same shape. But now she could see where the strands ended, and where just a tug or a push would begin to unravel them. It was so obvious she heard herself laugh, and the sound curved away into shades of orange and red and vanished into the ceiling. Time passed. Even with the power throbbing through her head, it was a painfully hard task, like threading a needle by moonlight. But eventually she had a handful of silver. In the slow, heavy world in which she now appeared to be, she took the hank and threw it slowly toward Esk. It became a cloud, swirled like a whirlpool, and vanished. She was aware of shrill, clittering noise, and the shadows on the edge of sight. Well, it happened to everyone sooner or later. They had come, drawn as always by a discharge of magic. You just have to learn to ignore them. All right, everybody. Again, I hope you had a fantastic weekend. Hope you're still enjoying the stories. And we'll be seeing you tomorrow. We're going to leave off here on page 53. We are doing fantastic. And remember that I love you. Good night.